What's going on, y'all? BBQ Dropout here yet again. So if you're wondering how long you should be smoking a 16-pound brisket, just know that it should take anywhere from like 8 to 9 hours worth of cook time to cook a 16-pound brisket if you're cooking it at a hotter temperature range. So it's like 8 to 6 hours to about maybe like 16 to like 18 hours worth of cook time if you're cooking it at a lower temperature range. And so how do you know that? So basically there's always like two main things that are going to move the needle in terms of producing a fully cooked brisket. And a fully cooked brisket is a brisket that has temped out at around 200 degrees Fahrenheit in internal temperature, and when it probes tender, so you can stick a toothpick in it and it can just kind of go in and out like butter, right? So that's a fully produced brisket, ready to be pulled off the smoker and rested and sliced and prepared and eaten. And so to get there, you want to be able to figure out how long it can take to get there, regardless of whether or not it's like a 16-pound brisket or like if it's a 50,000-pound brisket. There's always two things that are going to move the needle. Number one, how much does the brisket weigh? In this case, 16 pounds. Number two, what temperature are you cooking it at? Doesn't matter if you're cooking it in a smoker, if you're cooking it in the oven, if you're cooking it like in a traditional like brick like fire pit or whatever. Those are the two things that are always going to move the needle, even if you decide to wrap it or not, or if you're wrapping it versus like not wrapping it. I know that can kind of like expedite things, but in my experience and in my opinion, the two main things that are always going to move the needle is whether or not you are cooking it low and slow or hot and fast, and then gauge that based upon how much your brisket weighs. And so if you take the first half of that, so let's say you're cooking your brisket at around 225 degrees Fahrenheit. That's a low and slow cook, right? So you take that and then you have your 16-pound brisket. It's pretty easy to kind of guesstimate that it's going to take about 16 hours, because at that low and slow temperature range, it's going to take about an hour per 1 pound or 1 pound per 1 hour of cook time. 16 hours. If you want to give yourself some room, you can like add another like hour or so to it, or whatever. Totally fine. Let's say you're cooking it at about 275 degrees or above, my personal favorite, by the way. Then you can slowly start to kind of decrease the cook time to about 1.5 pounds to like 2 pounds per 1 hour of cook time. So in other words, if you're cooking it at about 275 degrees or hotter, hot and fast cook, then that same 16-hour brisket now only takes you about 8 hours to cook it, because you just simply cranked up the heat a little bit and the cook time has basically been cut in half. Now obviously, again, like you have to factor in like, you know, seasoning the brisket, putting the wood in the smoker, seasoning your smoker, let the smoker come up to temp, making sure like you have enough airflow to make the temperatures always consistent at a certain range. You know, all this little like kind of, you know, nitpicky stuff, in my opinion, can certainly impact the overall cook time. But again, like assuming all else is equal, any pound of brisket is going to cook either 1 pound per hour or about like 2 pounds per hour, depending on how hot and fast or how low and slow you cook it at. And so you take that range, you take that guesstimation, slap like another hour or two onto it, and that's your cook time for a 16-pound brisket.